Samsung is lazy, they're coasting. The new Fold has barely changed compared to last year's, and it can't compete with the latest foldables from China and elsewhere, right? If you've even glanced at any of the coverage of the Galaxy Z Fold 5, you'll have seen those arguments against Samsung's most expensive phone of 2023. But as someone who's used a Fold 4 on and off in recent months, before switching to the Fold 5 here as my main device a couple of weeks ago, I think there's more to this comparison than first meets the eye. But the problem with all the factors in sum that make the Fold 5 better than the Fold 4 is that they're kinda subtle. They're not the sort of things you notice on a spec sheet or spot in press renders or even see in Samsung's marketing spiel. Because as much as in some ways Samsung still kinda is coasting with these and some other phones, in many other respects this is a much better foldable than they've ever produced. So let's jump into why. The biggest physical difference you can show between the Fold 4 and Fold 5 is the fold itself, the fact that the newer model collapses down completely flat without the telltale wedge that was there before. This isn't just an aesthetic upgrade though. I found using this phone in my right hand most of the time, the few millimeters Samsung has managed to shave off the leftmost portion of the wedge here when it's closed does make a difference in how easy it is to use with one hand. Although the Fold 5 is definitely chunky and thicker and heavier than a typical smartphone, it's just that little bit easier to reach across the entire width of the panel when it's closed up, because you're not dealing with that extra wedge sticking out. The lighter weight also helps here, 10 grams lighter in the Fold 5 versus Fold 4. Not a huge difference though, and probably not something that the average person is going to notice unless they have both side by side to compare. But again, another tiny change that inches this device ever closer to something that feels more like a regular phone, even if we're not quite there yet. The other thing that makes the newer Fold feel more premium is something that might seem tiny, but it is a crucial detail. It's the lack of a crunch sound when you open this phone up. If you're unfamiliar, this is the telltale sound that comes out of the hinge or the display or both when opening a Fold 4 or older. It just makes it seem cheap and nasty, almost like there's something grinding against the internals of the hinge here. No such crunchiness with the hinge of the Fold 5, which is basically silent. Stick a microphone up against the Fold 4 and Fold 5 and you'll see the difference in the crunch or lack thereof. The other design differences are kind of a wash in terms of the impact they make on the hand feel, but they are still worth noting. The Samsung logo on the hinge is laser engraved as opposed to being embossed. The camera housing here is somewhat more svelte in the Fold 5, though the lenses themselves protrude slightly more from the body of the phone versus the Fold 4. And on account of the Fold 5 being slimmer, the fingerprint scanner here is ever so slightly narrower, which may make it a bit more difficult to get a full read of your fingerprint when you're setting it up. So much of the core spec sheet has basically been copy-pasted across from Fold 4 to Fold 5. Same screen dimensions, same base RAM and storage, same camera hardware. But that doesn't mean performance is exactly the same. In fact, in one or two key places, the Fold 5 dramatically outpaces the Fold 4. The biggest of these is probably battery life and heat. So one of the major reasons I could never use the Fold 4 as a daily driver was its battery life. It just never got me to that dependable full day of use that I could rely on from most high-end smartphones. What's more, even though the Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 powering the Fold 4 was, and still is, a decent chip, with extended use, especially using the internal screen, the older Fold could get a bit toasty. If you're doing so out and about on 5G in challenging network environments, you'll notice that extra heat and precipitous battery drain compared to a slab phone with the same chip. So given all the similarities, I was surprised to see that that's just not the case with the Fold 5. Longevity from this phone has been exemplary, not quite OnePlus 11 or S23 Ultra level, but close, really surprisingly close. I'd really struggle to kill it off in a day even with heavy use, and it fared much better out and about on 5G than the older phone with the older chip. In terms of screen on time, with my use across both screens, I could easily get past 5.5 hours out of the Fold 5 versus maybe 4 if I was lucky on the Fold 4. And the new phone did so while not getting anywhere near as warm to the touch. In terms of raw performance, of course, the newer chip will benchmark higher, but to me the difference isn't in those edge cases where you're maxing out the CPU, but rather the efficiency with which it handles those day-to-day phone or tablet tasks. A device like the Fold is supposed to be that powerhouse handset that you can use like a tablet when you need to. So actually being able to do that without completely tanking the battery is a big advantage for the Fold 5 versus the Fold 4. And it makes me more confident in being able to use the Fold 5 to its full capability, whether in gaming, multitasking, or productivity, without having one nervous eyeball on that battery icon in the corner of the screen. As for other spec bumps, the move up to a Galaxy S23 matching peak brightness of 1750 nits is appreciated, but not massively noticeable most of the time. This kind of thing is more of a big deal, I think, if you're comparing the Fold 5 to something like the Google Pixel Fold, especially that phone's notoriously reflective inner screen. But as far as I'm concerned, brightness on both folding screens on both Samsung phones is perfectly fine. And while the Fold 5 ships with One UI 5.1.1, currently the latest Samsung software, this newer version should be making its way out to older Folds in due course, bringing slightly more space for apps in the taskbar and enhancing drag and drop multitasking features. Really, the biggest difference in software between these two phones though is the software support lifespan, with the Fold 5 getting an extra year of OS updates, bringing it up to Android 17, with security patches until the summer of 2028. Cameras in Samsung's foldables have been a point of contention for the past couple of release cycles, with a lot of folks, including me, hoping for an improvement to a hardware setup that hasn't quite kept pace with the cutting edge. This year though, it was not to be. All 5 camera modules are basically identical between the Fold 4 and Fold 5, leaving any improvements to image or video quality to be brought through post-processing thanks to the quicker Snapdragon chip. So yeah, for the most part these are functionally identical cameras, and the only differences between them are super subtle. I think the Fold 5's colours are a bit more natural and not quite as saturated as the Fold 4's, meanwhile certain photos from the newer phone like this brickwork show a slight amount of additional sharpening. But honestly, either of those two factors could be imagined from me just squinting at side-by-side photo samples for way too long. Bottom line is, for the most part, these are sort of B-tier cameras, perfectly fine for your typical smartphone photography and social posts, but definitely an order of magnitude behind flagships like the S23 Ultra with their much larger sensors. There are only really a couple of areas where I noticed an appreciable difference in shots between the Fold 4 and Fold 5. First, much like the S23 Ultra, the Fold 5 is capable of taking night photos by combining output from both the primary and telephoto cameras. That's as opposed to the Fold 4, which defaults back to a digital crop of the main sensor in darker conditions. As a result, big difference in quality here, as you can see. The other low-key upgrade is in video, thanks to the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 chip. The Fold 5 supports 8K video up to 30 FPS, while the Fold 4 is capped at 24 FPS. I still think 8K at any frame rate is overkill for a phone, but if you value resolution above all else, then you'll have a bit more versatile video camera at your disposal with the Fold 5. The Fold 4 is still only a year old, and it was so expensive when it launched that chances are if you own one, the very similar Fold 5 is going to be a tough sell for you. The main things you're getting with an upgrade to the Fold 5 over the Fold 4 come down primarily to the newer Snapdragon chip. The biggest two for me are battery life and heat. Even aside from performance, being able to take full advantage of this phone in either the closed or open configuration without having to worry about the battery meter sinking like a lead weight is huge. That's something that I just couldn't get out of the Fold 4 with my use, and it's probably the biggest reason for you to try and convince yourself that you should offload last year's $1,800 folding phone and switch to this year's. Pretty much everything else with the Fold 5 is kinda just gravy. The other most important hardware changes for me are the slightly lighter weight and easier one-hand ability. Both of these make the newer Fold feel more like just a slightly chunky regular smartphone than its predecessor was, and the smoother hinge complete with the lack of the crunch adds to that premium feel. And on top of that, you've got Samsung's proven foldable software experience and a camera setup that's not as good as its best slab phones, but is dependable and consistent, along with all those fun photography tricks that make a Fold unique. Where we hit a pretty big snag though is with Samsung's trade-in prices. In the US, you'll get $1,000 off a Fold 5 right now by sending back your Fold 4, more than half the value of the device before tax. That's a decent deal that I'd be pretty tempted to take. But elsewhere, Samsung's not quite as generous. That same Fold 4 would get you back just £650 in the UK or €750 in Germany. I didn't know this guy was running Samsung's UK trade-in department. So yeah, your mileage will vary, potentially a lot. I still think the Fold 5 is a more substantial upgrade than most people are giving it credit for, and thanks to those subtle form factor upgrades and the improved battery life, I've enjoyed the new Fold a lot more than I did last year's model. As such, I definitely recommend the upgrade. Just if you're in the UK or Europe, maybe shop around for a better trade-in price for that older Fold. That's it for now. Let me know what you think of the Fold 5 down in the comments and whether Samsung has done enough this year in the face of more competition from the likes of Google. Subscribe for more comparisons like this. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.